Welcome to War Bios, the podcast where we delve into the intricacies of military history's most pivotal battles. I'm your host, General Biography, and today we're embarking on a fascinating journey through the American Civil War, focusing on the Battle of Pea Ridge, a clash that would prove decisive in the fate of the Trans-Mississippi Theater. This battle, fought from March 6 to 8, 1862, was a culmination of strategic maneuvering and tactical brilliance, set against the backdrop of the Ozark Mountains in what is now northwest Arkansas. To understand the significance of Pea Ridge, we must first step back into the tumultuous year of 1861. The Confederacy had formed, and the war between the Union and Confederate states was spreading across the continent like wildfire. In the West, particularly in Missouri and Arkansas, control of the region hung precariously in the balance, with both sides vying for dominance. The state of Missouri, despite its strategic importance due to the Mississippi River, remained in the Union, but it was deeply divided. Pro-Confederate elements were strong, especially in the southern part of the state, leading to a complex web of alliances and rivalries that would test the mettle of both the Union and Confederate forces. In the summer of 1861, Confederate forces under the command of General Sterling Price had won several victories in Missouri, notably at Wilson's Creek near Springfield, where they defeated a Union army led by General Nathaniel Lyon, who fell in the battle. This victory allowed Price to consolidate his control over southern Missouri, but it also drew the attention of the Union High Command, which began to plan a more substantial campaign to secure the region and drive the Confederates out. The echoes of Wilson's Creek still lingered, a stark reminder of the ferocity and unpredictability of war. Enter General Samuel R. Curtis, a seasoned commander with a wealth of experience from the Mexican-American War and now at the helm of the Union's Army of the Southwest. Curtis was tasked with driving the Confederates out of Missouri and then moving into Arkansas to disrupt Confederate supply lines and communication. He faced a formidable opponent in General Earl Van Dorn, who had been appointed by the Confederacy to take command of the Trans-Mississippi Department. Van Dorn was determined to expel the Union forces from the region and secure it for the Confederacy, driven by a mix of strategic necessity and personal ambition. As winter turned to spring in 1862, Curtis's army began its march into Arkansas, aiming to capture the city of Fayetteville, a key logistical hub that controlled access to the region. The Union Army moved with caution, aware of the treacherous terrain and the potential for Confederate ambushes. Meanwhile, Van Dorn sought to concentrate his forces, including those under General Price, to launch a decisive strike against the Union invaders. In early March 1862, Curtis's army found itself in the vicinity of Pea Ridge, Arkansas, preparing to face whatever forces Van Dorn could muster. The Union commander had chosen his ground carefully, positioning his troops on high ground near Elkhorn Tavern, which offered a commanding view of the surrounding countryside. It was here, amidst the rolling hills and dense forests of the Ozarks, that the Battle of Pea Ridge would soon erupt, pitting two determined armies against each other in a clash that would have far-reaching consequences for the war in the West. The air was thick with tension, and the scent of gunpowder hung heavy over the landscape like a specter of impending doom. Van Dorn, determined to drive the Union forces out of Arkansas, had begun to concentrate his troops, including those under General Price, in preparation for a decisive strike. The Confederate commander planned to attack the Union army from the north and south simultaneously, aiming to encircle and destroy Curtis's force. On the morning of March 6, 1862, Van Dorn launched his attack, with Price's division advancing from the north towards Elkhorn Tavern, while another Confederate division under General James McIntosh moved against the Union right flank. The Union lines held firm against the initial assault, but the Confederates made significant gains on the Union right, pushing back the troops under Colonel Eugene Asboth. As the fighting raged on, Curtis realized that his right flank was in danger of being overrun and ordered reinforcements to be sent to bolster the line. The battle intensified as the day wore on, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The sound of cannons boomed across the landscape, and the staccato bursts of rifle fire created a deadly symphony that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The Union artillery played a crucial role in repelling the Confederate attacks, with the guns of Captain Frederick Schaefer's battery inflicting significant damage on the advancing Confederates. Meanwhile, General Franz Sigel's division, which had been held in reserve, was committed to the battle, and its troops helped to stabilize the Union line. As night began to fall on March 6, the fighting died down, with both sides regrouping and reassessing their positions. Van Dorn, realizing that his plan to encircle the Union army had not succeeded, decided to launch a fresh attack on the morning of March 7. However, Curtis was prepared for him, and the Union lines were reinforced and repositioned to meet the expected assault. The next morning, the Confederates launched a series of fierce attacks against the Union center and left, but they were repelled with heavy losses. The Union artillery again played a key role, with Schaefer's battery helping to break up the Confederate formations. As the day wore on, it became clear that the Confederates were exhausted and depleted, and Curtis sensed an opportunity to launch a counterattack. With Sigel's division leading the way, the Union Army launched a decisive counterstroke against the Confederate right flank, pushing them back in disarray. The Confederates attempted to regroup, but it was too late, and they began to retreat from the battlefield in disorder. As the Union troops pursued the fleeing Confederates, Van Dorn's army was thrown into chaos, with many of its units becoming separated and leaderless. The psychological impact of the Confederate defeat cannot be overstated. The men who had marched onto the battlefield with such confidence and bravado just hours before were now fleeing in terror, their morale shattered by the relentless Union onslaught. As they stumbled through the darkness, pursued by the triumphant Union army, they must have wondered if the war was already lost. As the battle drew to a close on March 7, 1862, Curtis's army had emerged victorious, having repelled the Confederate attacks and sent Van Dorn's forces into retreat. The Union commander had saved his army from a potentially disastrous defeat, and his victory at Pea Ridge would have significant consequences for the war in the West. The Confederates would never fully recover from their loss at Pea Ridge, and the Union would go on to gain control of Missouri and Arkansas, paving the way for the eventual capture of Vicksburg and the splitting of the Confederacy. As the Confederate forces retreated from the battlefield, Curtis's army pursued them with relentless vigor, inflicting further casualties and capturing many prisoners. The Union victory at Pea Ridge was decisive, and it marked a significant turning point in the war in the West. The Confederates would never again threaten Missouri, and their defeat paved the way for the Union to gain control of Arkansas and eventually split the Confederacy. The echoes of cannon fire still lingered in the air as Curtis's men advanced, their boots trampling the blood-soaked earth and their eyes fixed on the fleeing enemy. In the aftermath of the battle, Curtis's army occupied the town of Bentonville, where they tended to the wounded and buried the dead. The streets, once filled with the sounds of commerce and daily life, were now lined with the makeshift hospitals, the smell of antiseptic and blood hanging heavy over the town. The Confederate forces, meanwhile, retreated to the Boston Mountains, where they regrouped and reassessed their strategy in the shadow of defeat. Van Dorn's face was etched with the weight of his failure, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep, and his mind racing with the consequences of his decisions. As news of the Union victory spread like wildfire through the telegraph lines, it was met with jubilation in the North. The Battle of Pea Ridge was seen as a major triumph, and it helped to boost morale and confidence in the Union war effort. People from all walks of life gathered in town squares, their faces aglow with excitement as they read the news from makeshift bulletin boards. In contrast, the Confederacy was forced to confront the reality of its defeat, and the loss at Pea Ridge would have far-reaching consequences for their strategy and prospects. The Southern press struggled to put a positive spin on the defeat, but the truth was undeniable. The Confederacy had suffered a significant blow. In the years that followed, the Battle of Pea Ridge would be remembered as a pivotal moment in the war. It marked a turning point in the conflict, after which the Confederacy would never again pose a significant threat to Missouri or Arkansas. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.